Olá! Você sabe como trazer uma criança adotada para os Estados Unidos de forma legal, para que ela possa ter os benefícios imigratórios também? Hoje nós vamos conversar sobre esse assunto de muito interesse da comunidade brasileira. Vamos também analisar como a nova administração pode trazer um impacto para os casos de adoção internacional. Olá, eu sou Renata Lillywhite, advogada de imigração, e esse é o Cruzando Fronteiras, um programa onde nós sempre discutimos assuntos de interesse para a população imigrante. Hoje eu vou conversar com a advogada de imigração e adoção internacional, Irene Steffas. Ela vem praticando direito há mais de 40 anos aqui nos Estados Unidos e é uma especialista no assunto. Eu vou deixá-la se apresentar, lembrando que essa entrevista será conduzida em inglês com legendas em português. Irene, how are you?
I'm fine. Good to be with you this morning, Renata.
Thank you so much for accepting the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I started my journey in immigration law in your office back in 2012, and I learned and I keep learning so much from you. So it's a pleasure to have you here today to talk about a very interesting topic always, that is international adoptions and immigration law. So Irene, tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, and start speaking about the thing that you know very well.
Well, when I went to law school, I didn't even take a class in immigration. My goal was to become a maritime law attorney, the law of the sea, but I didn't have the stamina to work 60 and 80 hours a week, so I left that practice. And then through a series of events, nothing intentional, I was led to do adoptions. And I've been very fortunate to have had a wonderful career where I've been able to see wonderful families formed. Professionally, I could not have asked for anything more. I even acted as a goodwill ambassador to Spain, Armenia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan for the State Department. That was a long time ago. And over the years, this has been my passion. Now, let me explain. Intercountry adoptions today is not like it was 40 years ago when I began. There are many, many challenges today that were unheard of back then.
Yeah, and Irene, you are also a primary provider, right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the agency that
Sure,
you are
sure.
founder of.
Sure. So the United States passed convention, a Hague Convention, we passed it in 1994, but we didn't ratify it and come into effect until April 1st, 2008. And at that time, immigration attorneys were sort of kicked out. You had to be either an accredited agency or an approved person. Back then, there were only 6 attorneys who applied to be approved persons, and I was one of them. That changed the landscape. Congress and the convention itself from The Hague wanted to have safeguards in place, and they put in a huge, huge number of regulations, and finally, in 2019, I thought, you better become an agency. So that's when I formed St. Nick's Kids. We were licensed, got our nonprofit designation, and then on September 29th, 2020, we received accreditation. So my agency is called St. Nick's Kids. Sounds religious, it's non-denominational, but I genuinely believe that God wants all his children to be taken care of in loving homes.
Yes. Thank you so much, Irene, for doing this job. This is a wonderful work for the community, especially for children. And let's now shift a little bit and talk about practical cases, like we receive calls from all over the world, especially Brazil, because I'm originally from Brazil. So the Brazilian community likes to take care of children or relatives, or
Yes.
Sometimes they live here, but they want to adopt a child in Brazil, like a relative, or even when it's not a relative. So they call the office with tons of questions saying, how do I bring this child here? How do I bring my niece? How do I bring, or how do how should I adopt any child in Brazil and bring them here? How do I do?
So, well, Brazil ratified the Hague Convention. It's called the Hague Convention on the Protection of Children and in Cooperation with Respect to Inter-Country Adoptions. Huge name, Convention 33 under the Hague. And since Brazil ratified the Hague and the United States ratified the Hague, bringing a child to America should be done doing the Hague dance. And it's very meticulous. Sequence is incredibly important. And from the United States, you have to have an accredited agency who will act as the primary provider. The primary provider manages the case. I like to say it's where the buck stops. We're the ones who talk to the government in Brazil and try to move a case forward. And you mentioned relatives. I believe, just like everybody else, that there should be a little bit of a shortcut for relatives. There isn't. There's a lot of things about the law that I'm not in full agreement with, but we have to work with it. And what you see in Brazil, Renata, is the same thing we see all over the world. People want to adopt from their own countries, and it's a beautiful thing. So you must have a primary provider. Currently, there are about 60 of us nationwide. And where will you find this information? At the State Department website, travel.state.gov. And the primary provider must seek permission from Brazil. So Brazil has how many states?
Oh, 26.
So if I want to do an adoption in one state, I have to get permission from that body's government, and that's not for the whole country. Then I want to go to another state, have to get permission from that country. And we have to have very good understanding, because we must comply with the Brazilian law, the American law, and the immigration law. Everybody thinks, oh, adoption is a beautiful thing, it should be easy. Yes, adoption is a beautiful thing. It's not easy, because it doesn't end with adoption. You adopt a child in a foreign country, well, now how are we going to bring that child here? We have to look at the U.S. immigration laws.
Exactly. So yeah, adoption law and immigration law, they work together, right? They have to be synchronized. You cannot bring a child here just because you adopted a child in Brazil and then you decide to bring this child here without following the immigration law procedures. So it's very important to remind people of that.
Yes.
Because some people try to circumvent the system, the law, and they try to get tourist visas, they try to get other types of visas, or they cross the border with a child. Oh, but I adopted the child, so now I think we can legalize this child here.
Yeah.
And it's not like that.
No.
So Irene, other types of cases, like when the couple who wants to adopt a child, they live in that country with the child.
Okay.
They've been living with the child, they have adopted the child. So how do they bring this child here now?
Well, if they satisfy the U.S. law for family petitions, they can then bring the child here. And that has 5 criteria. Number 1, the family must be habitually residing in Brazil at the time of the adoption. That means they have a home, they have insurance, they have a driver's license. This is where they live, and they've lived there at the time of the adoption. That's the first thing. And I had a case last week. A family went to Mongolia, adopted their niece, and came back. They weren't habitually residing there. I said, I can never get your case approved. So we had to go to Plan B. The second requirement is they must have a full and final decree of adoption, not a guardianship, but an adoption decree. And that decree must follow the Brazilian law and the convention. The adoption must be finalized before the child's 16th birthday, unless you have siblings. If you have siblings, the youngest must be under 16 and the oldest must be under 18. That's a very strict federal statute. Then criteria number 3, you must live with the child for 24 months. A lot of people say, well, I go there every year for vacation. Not enough. USCIS wants to see 6-month chunks of time. And then the hardest part is legal custody, 24 months of legal custody. And legal custody means you're making all the decisions of the child, and it doesn't matter when you started living with the child, it's when a court or an administrative body gave you legal custody of the child or guardianship, or the adoption's finalized. So if you have all of those criteria, then you can do a family petition and bring the child in.
Okay. And Irene, what happens when the child lives in a country that is not part of the Hague Convention, like Jamaica, for example?
Okay, so in those cases, the 4 criteria are still the same: full and final decree before age 16, 24 months of joint residency, 24 months of legal custody, but you don't have to be habitually residing there at the time of the adoption. It's really the only difference.
Okay. Irene, explain a little bit more about the role of the primary provider, because people don't understand what is a primary provider. Even in Portuguese, when I was trying to explain, when I worked on cases from Brazil, I remember at that time people would say, but what is a primary provider? Which is the provedor primário in Portuguese. Explain to us, please.
That's a good question, Renata, because other countries, their governments take care of this process. I think the US State Department was a little intimidated of taking on this role all over the world for all 50 states. And so what they decided to do is they delegated this responsibility to accredited agencies. So the accredited agency is the one who's in contact with the government, various levels of government in Brazil, different levels of government in the United States. Primary provider, we manage the case from beginning to end. Every tiny detail is documented, sequence. You can't just go and finalize your adoption. You have to wait for certain steps to have occurred before you go to court and finalize it. So we have reporting that we do to the State Department. We are monitored very closely. Every child that comes to America under the convention, there is a fee of $850. It doesn't go to the adoption agency. It goes to this outside company, and they monitor to make sure everything is perfect, finances are exactly correct, and everything is above board. Total 100% transparency.
Let's talk a little bit about stories, interesting stories.
We have.
I know you have. So share with us at least 2 stories with regards to international adoptions.
There are so many, it's really hard to pick one. They're all a challenge, and because I'm an attorney, attorneys are a little more gutsy than adoption agencies' social workers. So our agency has an attorney and 4 social workers. So we have a nice balance, and we simply follow the rules. So the first thing we have to do, sorry, you wanted a story. Let me just think. Getting permission from the foreign country is not easy. So we tried to have a case out of Mongolia many years ago, over a decade ago, and the family was adopting a relative. It took over a year for that country to give us permission to process that case. What that means is no children were coming from Mongolia. Now, for the first time, Kenya is considering allowing relatives to come to the U.S. So it's always a challenge. One of the things that we've run into is a family will want to take shortcuts. So what they'll do is they'll put their names as the biological parents on the name of the child's birth certificate. And they think they're very smart in doing that, except the State Department and USCIS is they figured that one out. So you have a woman go in to the consulate and says, this is my child, here's my birth certificate. And they say, oh, congratulations, this is wonderful. Would you please see the panel physician to verify you just gave birth? And of course, then the case falls apart. Or the husband will say, this is my child. Congratulations, we need DNA testing to verify that you are the child. And of course, the DNA testing shows that he's not the child. Once you have a negative impression by the US government, it's very hard to rehabilitate that. And so it's tough. All cases are won with evidence. So there was a case from the Philippines many years ago, I think it was 1996. And the State Department, from the consular officers, came up that the birth mother said she was only doing this to get the child a visa faster to come to America. And it just didn't seem right. So the central government of adoption from the Philippines went out and interviewed her. And what they found was that the report that was given to the American government was not accurate. And fortunately, we had a PhD in social work, and she explained that this woman had been abused, and as an abused woman, when someone spoke to her from authority, she simply looked down. She did not say yes, she did not say no, but the US government interpreted that from our culture that she was agreeing with them. And the case took many twists and turns. We were able to provide great evidence that this woman had, in fact, deserted her children. And after a long battle, USCIS approved it. 3 days later, the children got their visas to come to America.
That's good.
So
it's so gratifying, right?
it is gratifying, but you have to have evidence. If you don't have evidence, pretty words are not enough.
And I know from my experience that Irene is very passionate about her work, about children, and I know that she works hard to get those children here. Irene, just to finalize here, any changes you're anticipating from the new administration with regards to international adoption?
That's a very tough question because I cannot predict what changes are there. What I am seeing and have been seeing for some time is a slowdown. I do not believe that there are actual backlogs for adoptions because there is no limit on the number of adoptions, immediate relatives, no backlog. However, cases are taking 3 years for family petitions. Things that are black and white in the law and should be granted immediately are not happening, and I anticipate that that's going to get worse. Hope and pray it doesn't, but immigration's not what it was when I started. When I began, it was non-adversarial. Legacy INS, they worked with us. They helped us get a case approved. Today, adoption cases are viewed in the same way marriage fraud cases are considered. So the atmosphere towards adoption has radically changed for the worse.
Yes. Well, let's hope. Let's have some hope that it's going to get better in the future. Well, I wanted to thank you very much for coming here today and talking about this topic, educating people, and thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. I hope that I've helped the public in getting a better understanding of adoption and not be afraid of it, but just follow all the rules.
Yeah, follow the rules and don't try to do the case by yourselves, please, because it is a very complicated journey and a long journey. So you have to hire a specialized attorney, a primary provider. You have to consult with someone who understands this topic before you proceed, ok?
Thank you.
Esse foi o nosso Cruzando Fronteiras de hoje, falando sobre adoção internacional e imigração. Se você gostou da nossa entrevista, curta o nosso canal no YouTube, clique no sininho para receber as notificações e até o próximo!